I never asked for thank yous. I just wanted to help. But one night my daughter-in-law looked me in the eyes, smiled, and said, "You don't need to worry about our finances anymore." My name is Linda McCarthy. I'm 67, living in Boise, Idaho, a mother, a grandma, and for the last 10 years, the silent wallet of my family. I thought I was doing the right thing, until I realized sometimes helping too much only teaches people how to forget you. Before she was Grandma Linda, the woman who handcrafted pottery mugs and sent handwritten birthday cards, Linda McCarthy was a force in heels. For nearly 3 decades, she worked as the chief accountant at St. Mary's Regional Hospital in Boise. She could balance budgets, blindfolded, spot an error in a spreadsheet from 20 paces, and negotiate vendor contracts with a calm steeliness that made salesmen sweat. But none of that compared to the pride she felt raising her only son, Josh. Josh had been her world. His father left when he was 6, and from that moment on, it was just the two of them, him, with his endless questions, and her with the answers, and an extra shift to pay for soccer cleats. She made every parent-teacher night, packed every lunch, and never let him see the late notices on the utility bills. So when Josh married Rachel, a bright-eyed nurse with a soft voice and Pinterest-perfect dreams, Linda welcomed her with open arms. Not because she had to, but because she believed in love and family, in building something stronger together. At first, things were simple. Josh and Rachel rented a modest apartment near downtown. Rachel worked nights while Josh finished school. When bills piled up or the car needed fixing, Linda was always just a phone call away. "It's just a little help," she'd say, sliding her credit card over at the repair shop or wiring over rent money. "Don't worry about paying me back. Just promise you'll do the same for your kids one day." And she meant it. Every dollar came not from obligation, but love. When Josh landed his first job as a junior engineer, Linda cheered the loudest. And when Rachel cried after her 3rd miscarriage, it was Linda who showed up with soup tissues and her mother's old rosary. Over the years, Linda's support became more than occasional. When they bought their first home, it was her retirement fund that covered the down payment. When Rachel's student loans threatened to overwhelm them, Linda refinanced her own mortgage to help. Every Christmas, she made sure their tree was filled with gifts, even when her own was bare. She paid for daycare when their first child, Ellie, was born. And when their second, Max, arrived prematurely, it was Linda who cleared the hospital bill behind the scenes, never mentioning it to them directly. She never asked for anything in return. Not dinners, not recognition, not even so much as a thank you card. What mattered to her wasn't acknowledgement it was being needed. It was the unspoken role she'd taken on the quiet matriarch, the financial foundation. And besides, she loved them. Isn't that what love looked like? Selflessness. Linda even set up a shared savings account labeled Family Fund. Josh had access Rachel too. Every month she deposited a portion of her pension there, enough to cover unexpected school fees, dentist visits, piano lessons, or a weekend trip they might not otherwise afford. When they went to Disneyland for Max's 4th birthday, Linda was the one who footed the bill for the flight's hotel, and even matching t-shirts. She didn't go herself. She insisted they make the memory as a young family, but she smiled for days when she saw the photos. She told herself she was doing the right thing. After all, wasn't this the dream? To give your children more than you had, to make their lives easier? Still, there were little signs, hints of imbalance. Once when Ellie broke her tablet and Linda offered to replace it, Rachel said, "Oh good, I was hoping you'd step in again." It was probably a joke, Linda thought at the time. And when Josh forgot to call her on her birthday, saying work had been crazy, she brushed it off. Life was busy, she understood. There were other moments too. Small ones, like how Rachel never offered to help with groceries when they visited, or how Josh started texting her only when they needed something. But Linda didn't dwell on those things. She told herself not to keep score. She believed love didn't work that way. Every time she sat down to review her monthly expenses, seeing her savings shrink and her retirement budget tighten, she told herself it was worth it. They were building a life, and she was helping lay the bricks. That had to mean something. That had to be enough. Her friends raised eyebrows. Linda, they'd say over book club brunches or yoga mats, you've got to draw some lines. They're adults now. You're not a bank. But Linda would just smile. They're my family, she'd reply. And if I don't help, who will? She never imagined that the very people she was helping could one day turn that help into something unwelcome. That the line between generosity and intrusion could blur so quietly, so completely, until she was no longer a lifeline, but a burden. But that part of the story hadn't happened yet. For now, in this chapter of her life, Linda still believed in the power of giving. Still believed that love was best shown not with words, but with sacrifice. Even if it meant sacrificing a little bit of herself. It didn't happen overnight. At first, Linda barely noticed the change. A missed thank you here, a forgotten follow-up there. No big deal. Families get busy, kids grow. She chalked it up to stress, new jobs, young children, long nights. But then the subtle shifts became harder to ignore. She remembered one Saturday afternoon, not long after she'd paid for Ellie's preschool enrollment. She dropped by with a bag of groceries, organic fruit, Ellie's favorite yogurt, a bottle of wine Rachel once mentioned offhand. The door was open, the kids were playing, but the welcome felt muted. "Oh," Rachel said, glancing up from her phone. "You didn't have to do that." It wasn't the words, it was the tone. Flat, almost inconvenienced. Linda placed the bag on the counter, smiled, and tried not to let it land too deep. "I just thought you might need a few things," she said cheerfully. "Thanks," Rachel said without looking up again. Josh came in a minute later, gave her a side hug. "Hey, Mom, appreciate it." But he didn't linger. No chat, no "how've you been?" He drifted back to the living room like someone checking off a task. It was the first time Linda felt like a visitor in the house she once helped buy. Still, she didn't say anything. Maybe they were tired. Maybe she was being sensitive. But the feeling didn't go away. If anything, it grew. She noticed Rachel stop texting her back promptly. Plans were rescheduled more often. Her calls went to voicemail more than once. And when Linda did get through, the conversations were brief, surface level. There were fewer updates about the kids. Fewer shared photos, fewer thought-of-you messages. She used to get FaceTime calls from Ellie, showing her artwork or Max babbling new words. Now days passed without a word. One afternoon, Linda transferred a few $100s from the shared family fund for Ellie's summer camp deposit. As usual, she sent a quick text to Rachel to let her know it was covered. Rachel's reply came hours later, short and clipped. "Got it." No heart emoji, no smiley face, not even a thank you. That night, Linda couldn't sleep. She scrolled through old messages, ones filled with gratitude and warmth from years earlier. "Linda, you saved us again. We're so lucky to have you. I don't know how we'd manage without your help." Even little notes like, "Thank you for loving us so well." But lately there was nothing like that. Nothing warm, just silence or worse, obligation. One day at a brunch with her friend, Marianne, Linda finally said it aloud. "I think they're starting to resent me." Marianne sipped her coffee, raised an eyebrow. "Because you're helping them too much." Linda nodded slowly. "Maybe they feel watched, like I'm controlling things." "Are you?" That made Linda pause. "No," she said carefully. "At least I don't mean to be. I've always let them decide. I just filled in the gaps." "Sometimes people confuse support with judgment," Marianne said, "especially when they're insecure about needing help in the first place." It hit a little too close. But Linda knew there was truth in it. A few weeks later, she stopped by unannounced to drop off a birthday card and some cash for Max. Rachel answered the door. Her smile was polite but tight. "Oh, you didn't have to do that," she said again. Linda handed her the envelope. Just a little something for Max. I thought I'd catch him before nap time." Rachel hesitated. "Actually, he's already down. And we're kind of in the middle of something." Linda looked past her. Josh was on the couch, half watching TV, Ellie next to him on a tablet. Nothing middle of about it. "Oh," she said quietly. "Okay, I'll just leave this then." Rachel took the envelope without another word. That night Linda heard something she wasn't supposed to. She was leaving the house, walking down the path to her car, when she realized she'd forgotten her sunglasses. She turned back slowly, just in time to hear Rachel's voice from the kitchen window, low, irritated. "I just wish she'd stop acting like our personal bank. We're not kids anymore." Josh said something Linda couldn't make out. Then Rachel again. "We'd be fine if she stopped hovering and let us live." Linda froze. It was only a few words, but they landed like a punch to the chest. She didn't go back for the sunglasses. That night she sat in the dark of her kitchen, hands wrapped around a cup of chamomile tea gone cold. She didn't cry. Not yet. Instead, she went over every little moment, every missed thank you, every awkward silence, every time she'd excused behavior that now felt different. They didn't see her as supportive anymore. They saw her as intrusive. Her generosity had become a shadow in their home, unwelcome, unwanted. But what hurt most wasn't the words themselves. It was the realization that somewhere along the way, the relationship had changed. Not just strained, but shifted. She wasn't their safe place anymore. She was the backup plan they resented needing. Linda had always believed love was best shown through action, through provision, through being there again and again. But maybe, just maybe, she'd been giving them the wrong kind of love, the kind that enables instead of empowers, the kind that makes people feel smaller, not stronger, the kind that over time feels more like pressure than care. She didn't know what to do next, not yet. But for the first time in years, she knew one thing for certain. Something had to change. It was a Thursday evening in late March, one of those crisp Idaho nights where the chill settles just enough to remind you winter isn't quite ready to say goodbye. Linda had been invited over for dinner, a rare occurrence these days, and she wasn't about to turn it down. She put on her favorite cashmere sweater, the one Josh gave her 3 Christmases ago, back when gifts still came with handwritten notes. She brought a lemon meringue pie from the bakery downtown and even wore lipstick. Dinner was casual, pasta salad, store-bought garlic bread. The kids were noisy. Rachel looked tired, and Josh, as usual, spent more time at the sink than at the table. Still, Linda smiled through it all. She didn't want much, just to be around them, to feel even briefly like part of the fabric again. After the dishes were cleared and the kids shuffled off to bed with promises of bedtime stories, Linda stayed a while longer sipping herbal tea in the living room. The TV hummed low in the background, Rachel scrolling on her phone, Josh flipping through mail. That's when Linda, without planning, to ask the question. "So, how's the refinancing going on the mortgage?" It was simple, curious, not judgmental. After all, she'd been the one to guide them through the original home purchase. She thought maybe they'd want her advice again, maybe just a second opinion. Rachel didn't look up right away, but when she did, her expression was soft, too soft, polished, practiced. "Oh, we've got it handled," she said with a smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. "You don't need to worry about it, Linda." Josh didn't say anything. He just stared down at a coupon flyer on his lap, suddenly very invested in frozen pizza deals. Linda tilted her head slightly. "I'm not worried. Just thought maybe you'd like help looking over the terms." "Sometimes those banks," Rachel interrupted, still smiling. "Really, we're good. We've got a plan. You don't have to get involved with our finances anymore." There it was. It wasn't cruel, it wasn't loud, it didn't even feel confrontational. It was a statement delivered like a polite rejection at a bake sale. But Linda heard it clearly. You don't need to get involved anymore." She felt it hit sharp and clean, like the snap of an icicle breaking loose from a roof. Josh finally looked up. His eyes flickered to hers, and for the briefest moment she saw it, the guilt, the hesitation. But he said nothing. Linda gave a small laugh, trying to soften the moment. "Of course," she said, voice gentle. "I didn't mean to overstep." Rachel stood up, gathering empty mugs. "You didn't. I just think we're at a point where we need to do things our way." Linda nodded. "Right, that makes sense." Josh got up to help her in the kitchen. Rachel disappeared down the hallway, murmuring something about checking on Max. The room was quiet now. Linda stood slowly, pie forgotten. She walked to the front door, pulling on her coat, careful not to slam the closet. Josh returned just in time to see her slipping her arms into the sleeves. "You heading out?" She smiled again, that practiced pleasant smile that mothers learn to wear like armor. "Early day tomorrow. Thought I'd get a jump on traffic." Josh stepped closer, as if to hug her, then thought better of it. Or maybe he didn't. Either way, it never happened. "Thanks for dinner," she said, her voice soft but steady. He nodded. "Drive safe." She stepped into the cool night air and didn't look back. Inside, Rachel's voice echoed faintly from one of the bedrooms, reading a story. Josh closed the door behind her with a soft click. In her car, Linda sat for a long time before starting the engine. The dashboard light glowed dimly, casting shadows across her face. She wasn't angry. Not exactly. She was awake. It was like someone had flipped a switch, and the house she'd been living in for years looked suddenly unfamiliar. Every room rearranged, every light bulb replaced. For so long, she'd walked around believing she was part of the structure support beam's foundation. But now she saw she was furniture, useful when needed, stowed when not, something to be managed, and the worst part, she'd done it to herself. She thought about every bill she'd paid, every debt she'd cleared, every need she'd filled before it was even voiced. She thought about how natural it had become for them to lean back, knowing she would always catch them. But tonight, for the first time, they'd told her no more. And as much as it stung, it was also something else. Clarifying. They didn't want her involved. Not in their struggles, not in their decisions, not even in their plans. She had become the safety net they resented, the generosity they mistrusted, the presence that, no matter how quiet, still felt like pressure. Linda took a deep breath, her hands still on the steering wheel. She hadn't yelled, she hadn't cried, she hadn't argued. She had smiled, nodded, and walked out with grace. But inside her, something had shifted, quietly. Finally. It wasn't the kind of change that came with fireworks or slammed doors. It was the kind of change that comes when a door closes and you realize you don't need to knock again. Linda didn't sleep much that night. After Rachel's carefully packaged dismissal, "You don't need to get involved anymore." She'd driven home in a silence that felt like fog, heavy, muffled. Every streetlight she passed seemed to echo the words in her head. By morning, something inside her had crystallized. There would be no confrontation, no emotional appeal, no dramatic declarations. Linda McCarthy was done explaining herself. At exactly 6:02 a.m., while the sky was still bruised with early dawn, she sat at her desk with the calm precision of a woman who had spent her life working numbers and spotting imbalances. Only now the imbalance wasn't in a spreadsheet, it was in a relationship. She opened the browser, logged in. The shared bank account, 4,710 poziols. With a few keystrokes, it became zero. Funds moved into her personal savings, untraceable, final. She opened another tab, her retirement account. No more automatic monthly transfers into Ellie and Mac's education fund. She shut it down, effective immediately. Next came the auto payments. She canceled the piano lessons first, then the internet. The streaming services, school lunch fund, gym memberships, even the mobile plan under Josh's name, gone. She reset every password on every account she'd once shared or created for them. Nothing dramatic, no red flags, just quiet, methodical extraction. By 7:45 a.m., Linda McCarthy no longer existed in their financial lives. She didn't call to explain, didn't send a note, let them wonder. The phone buzzed around 8 p.m. A text from Josh. "Hey, the Wi-Fi's down. Did the card expire?" No reply. 10 minutes later, Mom did something happen with the account. Still nothing. At 9:15, Rachel called. Linda watched the phone ring the name flashing across the screen, then fade. She powered the phone off. There was a strange peace in the silence that followed. She spent the rest of the morning doing things no one would think twice about, deleting shared calendars, pulling herself off emergency contact forms at the kids' school, removing her name from the pediatrician's records. She called the property manager of the summer cabin they used to rent every year together. "Cancel the July booking," she said. No replacement dates, no explanation. That night, she opened the family photo drive she had curated for the past 10 years. Thousands of images, first birthdays, school plays, beach days. She downloaded every file, organized them into folders, then locked them behind a new private cloud account. The old one deleted, just like that. By the time Josh and Rachel began to panic, Linda had already completed the vanishing act. A slow fade out, perfectly engineered with no doors slammed and no fingerprints left behind. There were no arguments, no second chances offered, and no trail. Only absence and questions, lots of questions. That was the part Linda knew would sting most, the not knowing. The silence didn't come with an explosion. It came slowly, steadily, like fog settling over a familiar town, until nothing looked quite the same anymore. The calls stopped after the first week. At first they came in bursts, texts from Josh, voicemails from Rachel, even a video message from Ellie, holding up a crayon drawing and saying, "Grandma, we miss you." But Linda had already made the choice. No replies, no explanations, only silence. She didn't block them. She just let the lines go quiet, like a switch flipped in the dead of night. Her house felt larger now, not empty, just hers. The kind of quiet that used to feel lonely now felt like space. Breathing room, sanctuary. For the first time in years, Linda didn't wake up to notifications. No requests for a little help, no last-minute emergencies, no late-night messages asking if she could just cover one more thing until next payday. What came instead was stillness, and in it the strange realization that she had no idea what she wanted anymore, not from them, but from herself. She started with small things. The pantry, she cleared it out. Rows of kids' snacks, baby cereal no one had touched in years, backup juice boxes gone, donated, tossed, erased. She replaced them with dark chocolate roasted almonds, bottles of wine that didn't have to be shared. The living room, she moved the furniture, took down the family sign Rachel had given her on Mother's Day 6 years ago, now faded and dusty. She hung a painting of the ocean in its place, bought new throw pillows, ones that didn't need to be child-proofed. Then she did something unexpected. She booked a pottery retreat, 3 weeks in Mendocino, California, clay ocean breeze and people who knew her, not as mom or grandma, but just Linda. She didn't ask anyone's permission. She didn't even tell anyone she was going. She just went. It was terrifying. And then it wasn't. Each morning she walked barefoot into the studio, the smell of earth and salt in the air. She worked clay with hands that had once packed lunches and balanced checkbooks, now shaping vases with curves as imperfect as her own history. At night she sat by the fire pit, with strangers turned friends, sipping wine, sharing stories, some of which weren't about her family at all. And for the first time, Linda stopped introducing herself with "I'm Josh's mom." She just said, "I'm Linda." At the retreat, she started a journal. The first page was blank for a long time. Then she wrote a single sentence: "I don't owe anyone my exhaustion." The words felt dangerous and true. When she returned home, Boise looked different. Or maybe she did. The silence remained. Rachel hadn't reached out again. Josh had sent one message on her birthday, a hesitant, "Hope you're well." No emojis, no follow-up. Linda hadn't responded. She wasn't punishing them. She was protecting herself. For years, she had measured her worth in utility, what she gave, fixed, solved, funded. She now saw how thin that currency had become. She'd been a one-woman safety net, stretched tight for too long, and the unraveling had started long before Rachel's polite dismissal. It had started the day she forgot how to say no. Now in the quiet, she remembered. She said no to a family dinner she wasn't invited to. No to a guilt-wrapped olive branch from Josh when he dropped off a belated Christmas card. No to stepping back into the role of fixer, financier, forgiver. Instead, she said yes to other things. She joined a writing group, read poetry out loud for the first time in 40 years. She adopted a rescue dog named Leo, a shaggy mutt with anxious eyes and a tail that thumped like applause every time she came home. She even reconnected with Marianne and took a spontaneous road trip to Santa Fe just because neither of them had ever been. She laughed more, slept deeper, ate dinner at the table with candles lit and no cartoon noise in the background. Freedom didn't roar in, it crept. Quiet, tentative like a guest, unsure if it was welcome. But it was. She welcomed it. Still late at night, there were moments of ache. She missed Ellie's wild storytelling, Max's chubby hands pulling at her sleeve. She missed hearing "Love you, Mom" from Josh. And yes, she missed Rachel too, before the distance, before the edge. But longing wasn't the same as regret. She had not burned bridges. She had simply stopped building ones that only she maintained. One afternoon, months into the silence, Linda opened her journal again. She flipped to a blank page and wrote, "I love them fully, but I forgot to love myself too." She closed the book and smiled. She wasn't angry. She was awake. She didn't know what the future would look like, whether reconciliation would come, whether Josh would one day call, not to ask for anything, but just to hear her voice, whether Rachel would ever say, "I'm sorry." But she knew this. She was no longer lost in the role of giver. She was becoming whole, seen by herself first, and finally free. The knock came on a Sunday morning. It was soft, 3 taps, spaced just enough to sound hesitant. Linda, in the middle of watering her basil plant on the windowsill, froze. She hadn't had an unannounced visitor in months. Leo barked once and trotted to the door tail, wagging uncertainly. Linda placed the watering can on the counter, wiped her hands on her apron, and approached slowly. Through the frosted glass, she saw a tall silhouette, hands shoved in pockets. "Josh!" She didn't open right away. Let him wait. Another knock, softer this time. When she opened the door, her son stood awkwardly on the porch, eyes tired, a week's worth of guilt etched into his expression. "Hey, Mom," he said, his voice quiet. Linda nodded once, stepping aside. "Come in." He walked in like someone entering a church, cautiously, reverently, not quite sure he belonged anymore. The house looked different to him, brighter, warmer, more lived in. There were ceramic pieces on every shelf, unfamiliar paintings, fresh flowers in the kitchen. It didn't smell like formula and laundry detergent anymore. It smelled like lemon balm and rosemary, like Linda. She didn't offer coffee. She didn't ask him why he came. She just sat on the armchair opposite her son and waited. He glanced around the room, eyes landing briefly on Leo, then on the clay vase near the window. "I almost didn't come," he said. I figured, she replied, her tone calm, measured. A beat of silence stretched between them like elastic ready to snap. Then he said it. "We didn't mean to hurt you." Linda tilted her head. "But you did." Josh nodded slowly, the weight of months pressing on his shoulders. Rachel didn't mean what she said like that. You didn't stop her. He looked away. Honestly, he said, I think I just got used to it. You always being there, handling things. It became background, like air, until it wasn't. Linda's face softened, but she didn't let him off the hook. Air doesn't pay your mortgage. Josh let out a bitter chuckle, rubbing his hands over his face. No, it doesn't. I listened to what Rachel said. That night she continued. But what hurt more was what you didn't say. His jaw tightened. I didn't know what to say. I felt like if I defended you, she'd think I wasn't supporting her. If I defended her, I'd betray you. You chose silence. Josh swallowed hard. Yeah. Linda stood, walked to the kitchen, poured herself a glass of water. She didn't ask if he wanted one. You know, she said, turning back to him, I don't blame Rachel. Not really. Josh looked up surprised. I blame myself for allowing you both to believe that love comes with no boundaries, that being there for you meant being invisible. She walked back to her chair and sat down, her voice steadier than ever. I taught you that. I showed up for everything, paid for everything, solved everything. And in doing so, I erased myself. Josh's eyes glossed with unshed tears. Mom, I thought I was being generous, but I was teaching you how to live without appreciating the cost of anything. Now the tears came. Quiet, ashamed human. I'm sorry, he whispered, not just for what Rachel said, but for making you feel like an ATM with a heartbeat. Linda didn't cry. Not now. She'd done her grieving already in silence, in ceramic and cinnamon tea, and long walks by the sea. I don't hate you, Josh, she said gently, but I don't trust you. Not yet. The words landed like a gavel. Josh nodded slowly as if the sentence fit. I came because... He began, then stopped. She waited. I came because I didn't realize how much you were holding until you let go. And everything fell apart, and I really saw how fragile we've become without you. Linda sighed. It's not supposed to be fragile. That's the point. I was supposed to raise a man, not a dependent. Josh looked her in the eyes. Then, I want to be better. For my kids. For myself. And for you. He pulled something from his jacket. A letter. Folded, slightly crumpled. He placed it on the table between them. It's from Rachel. Linda stared at it. She's not ready to face you, but she's trying. It's a start. She didn't reach for the letter. Tell her I don't want apologies, she said quietly. I want awareness and effort, real effort. Josh nodded. Then, almost childlike, he asked, can I still come by sometimes, just me? No agenda, just to talk. Linda studied her son. For a moment she saw the boy he used to be, the one with dirt on his cheeks and questions in his eyes. I think that would be good, she said. Not a yes. Not a no. A possibility. Josh exhaled, a breath he'd been holding since Christmas. He stood to leave, glancing back at the house, his mother's world now separate whole. You look happy, he said, half smiling. Linda didn't return it. I am, and it didn't come cheap. As he walked out the door, she picked up the letter. She didn't open it, not yet. Instead, she walked to her studio, the late morning sun slanting through the windows, dust motes dancing like applause. She sat at her work table, hands covered in clay, and began shaping a new piece. A bowl, simple, round, sturdy, for holding, not giving away. In the months that followed Josh's visit, Linda didn't expect miracles. She had learned the hard way that change doesn't come with flowers and tears. It comes with time and silence and the empty space where old patterns used to live. But as summer slipped into fall, the consequences of her withdrawal began to echo more loudly in the lives she once propped up. It started small. Rachel returned to full-time work. She had to. With the support net gone, the family budget cracked under pressure. The ballet classes stopped. Max's speech therapy sessions were scaled back. Their weekends, once filled with outings paid for from a card Linda kept on file just in case were suddenly quiet and homemade. Linda didn't gloat. She didn't watch from a distance waiting for them to fall apart. But life has a way of collecting debts we don't realize we've borrowed against. Josh's hours at work increased. He picked up freelance contracts at night, staring at spreadsheets until his eyes burned. Rachel, already worn thin, began coming home later, too exhausted to talk. The tension thickened, subtle but ever-present. They tried at first to recreate the life Linda had subsidized for years. But it was like trying to perform a ballet underwater. Eventually, they stopped pretending. One day, Ellie asked why they weren't going to Grandma's for Thanksgiving. Rachel said something vague about needing space. But kids are smarter than we think. That night, Ellie drew a picture herself, her brother and Grandma holding hands. She folded it and slipped it into Josh's briefcase. He found it 3 days later during a late meeting and cried in the office bathroom for 10 minutes straight. The real cost wasn't the missed payments or the tighter meals or the thinning social calendar. It was what Josh and Rachel began to see in each other, the way they had leaned so heavily on Linda that they'd never really built something of their own. They hadn't grown strong together. They'd simply grown dependent in parallel. One Saturday, after yet another tense conversation about money, Rachel said what had been sitting between them for months. "You know, we never really did this on our own." Josh didn't argue, because she was right. Without Linda, they were forced to confront every crack she had plastered over for years. Resentments, unrealistic expectations, emotional laziness. All the things love doesn't fix when it's too easy to borrow someone else's strength. Rachel eventually took a second job part-time at a local clinic. Josh stopped freelancing and tried to be more present at home, but the gap between them was already showing signs of erosion. Their once carefully constructed marriage was no longer held together by support, but by shared stress. One evening, Josh called Linda. He didn't ask for money. He asked, "How did you do it alone all those years?" Linda paused, then said, "I stopped waiting for someone to save me." The line went quiet. Then Josh whispered, I thought you liked doing everything for us." Linda's voice was steady. "I did. Until I realized I was doing it for the version of you I hoped you'd grow into. Not the one you became. It wasn't cruel. It was honest." The truth landed harder than any lecture could. Josh thanked her, not for the call, but for stopping, for forcing him to stand. The biggest price he paid wasn't financial. It was realizing that without his mother, he didn't know how to show up fully for his wife, for his kids, or even for himself. Rachel's reckoning came more slowly. She wrote another letter, a real one this time, mailed in an envelope with careful handwriting. Linda opened it one October morning. Inside were 2 pages folded with care. Rachel didn't beg for forgiveness. She didn't make excuses. She wrote about pride, about the shame of feeling dependent and the fear of being exposed. She admitted how she had mistaken Linda's love for control and how ungratefulness had slowly become armor. But the last paragraph was what mattered most. She wrote, "I think I was so busy trying to prove I was capable. I forgot that kindness isn't weakness. I see now that I pushed you away, not because you were too involved, but because I didn't know how to be close without owing something." Linda folded the letter, tucked it into a drawer with old birthday cards and kindergarten photos. She didn't call Rachel. She didn't need to. Some lessons can only be learned in the aftermath. The holidays came and went. Linda spent Thanksgiving with Marianne's family, where she was toasted with pumpkin cider and laughter. At Christmas, she flew to Santa Fe for a week-long art workshop. No tree at home, no drama, just light and clay. Josh and Rachel had their own quiet Christmas. The kids asked about Grandma. This time neither parent lied. She needed space, Rachel told them, so she can take care of herself for a while. Max, only 5, frowned. But who's taking care of her Ellie, wise beyond her years, said, maybe she's taking care of herself now. Josh looked at Rachel. For once, no tension, just truth. It would take time, months, maybe years. But they had started to pay the price, not out of punishment, but out of necessity. And maybe that was the point. Love, real love, can't be built on the back of another person's sacrifice. It has to stand on its own feet, break and rebuild, learn, fall, rise. Linda didn't need them to apologize again. She didn't need them to come crawling back. All she ever needed was for them to see her clearly. And for once, maybe they finally did. Linda once believed that love meant never saying no. That real devotion was about showing up every time for every need, even when no one asked. She believed that giving made her worthy, that to be essential was to be needed, that sacrifice done in silence was the purest form of love. But silence, it turned out, could also be self-erasure. In the stillness that followed her quiet withdrawal, Linda rediscovered a truth buried beneath decades of giving. Love isn't about how much you can offer before you collapse. It's about mutual respect, about being seen not as a solution, but as a soul. She had once poured herself out like a never-ending cup. Now she was learning to drink first. The greatest awakening didn't come in the form of an apology from her children. It came the day she looked in the mirror and didn't see Mom, Grandma, or helper. She saw Linda, a woman with passions, with boundaries, with a life beyond the walls of her son's home. The world hadn't changed. She had. And in that shift, something powerful happened. She stopped shrinking herself to fit into the role others expected. She stopped apologizing for choosing herself. One morning, months after the silence had settled into its permanent form, Linda sat at her kitchen table with a mug she had crafted herself, strong, imperfect, uniquely hers. She opened her journal, turned to the back page, and wrote, "Love without boundaries becomes burden. Support without respect becomes servitude. And giving without balance becomes self-betrayal. I am no longer a silent participant in my own life. I am the author now." Linda didn't need closure. She had peace, and that peace wasn't loud or cinematic. It was a slow, steady reclaiming of her identity. She still loved her son. She still loved her grandchildren. But now she loved herself enough to say this far and no further. Because healing wasn't about reunion. It was about remembering that you deserve as much as you give. Have you ever loved someone so much that you forgot yourself in the process? Have you ever given so much for so long that you didn't realize how invisible you had become? Tell me your story in the comments. I read everyone. Like this video if Linda's story moved you. Subscribe for more real stories that hit home. And tell me, where are you watching from? Because sometimes hearing someone else's story is how we find the courage to reclaim our own.